Billionaire fell for the mysterious pregnant woman after she saved his life. The sound of Kieran Darius hitting the cobblestones wasn't just a fall. It was $2.3 billion crashing to earth, and the only person who moved to save him was the one everyone else pretended not to see. Hello, family. Welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how this story touched you. The autumn mist clung to Ember Falls like a secret, rolling off the lake in ghostly tendrils that seemed to whisper of things better left buried. Along the historic waterfront district, where million-dollar yachts bobbed beside weathered fishing boats, two worlds existed in careful, calculated ignorance of each other. Kieran Darius stepped from his midnight black Bentley, the soft thud of the door echoing across the cobblestone plaza. At 34, he moved with the controlled precision of a man who'd learned early that showing weakness was a luxury he couldn't afford. His charcoal suit, tailored to perfection, couldn't quite hide the tension that lived in his shoulders, a permanent reminder of the weight he carried. The scar along his left temple, barely visible beneath his dark hair, caught the morning light as he surveyed the crowd gathering for the Ember Falls Heritage Festival. He shouldn't be here. Board meetings, merger negotiations, the endless parade of obligations that came with running Darius Industries. All of it waited back in the city. But something about this place, about the way the lake reflected the sky like broken glass, had called to him. Maybe it was the anniversary. Maybe it was the dreams that had been haunting him, dreams of a little girl's laughter that he could never quite reach. Mr. Darius? His assistant, James, appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand. The car can take you back whenever you're ready. You're 2 p.m. with the Singapore investors. I know. Kieran's voice carried the edge that made boardrooms fall silent. But as he watched families stroll past, children clutching balloons and cotton candy, something in his chest loosened. Give me an hour. 3 blocks away, in the shadow of the old lighthouse that had guided ships safely home for over a century, Lyra Carter sat on a weathered bench, her hands resting on the gentle curve of her belly. At 28, she carried herself with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to make herself invisible. Her auburn hair, streaked with gold from too many hours in the sun, was pulled back in a simple braid. The oversized sweater she wore, soft gray wool that had seen better days, couldn't quite hide the way her green eyes constantly scanned the crowd, always watching, always ready to run. The baby kicked, a gentle flutter that made her smile despite everything. I know, little one, she whispered, her voice carrying the faint trace of an accent she'd worked hard to soften. You're getting restless. Just a little longer, and we'll find somewhere safe. Safe. The word felt foreign on her tongue. She'd been running for 6 months now, ever since the night everything changed. Ever since she'd discovered the truth about the man she'd thought she loved, the man whose child she carried. David Thornfield, respected doctor, pillar of the community, monster behind closed doors. The bruises had faded, but the fear remained, a constant companion that whispered warnings in the dark. She pulled the worn envelope from her pocket, the one containing the last of her savings. Enough for maybe another week, if she was careful. If she was lucky. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd once been Dr. Lyra Carter, emergency room physician, the woman who saved lives for a living. Now she was just another face in the crowd, another story of a woman who'd trusted the wrong man. The festival music drifted across the plaza, a cheerful melody that seemed to mock her circumstances. Children laughed, couples walked hand in hand, and life continued its relentless march forward while she sat frozen in time, afraid to move, afraid to stay. What do you think drives someone to risk everything to save a stranger? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The first sign something was wrong came not as a sound, but as a silence, the sudden, unnatural quiet that falls when the universe holds its breath. Kieran had been walking toward the lake, drawn by the way the afternoon sun turned the water into liquid amber, when the world tilted sideways. One moment he was thinking about the merger documents waiting on his desk, the next he was fighting for air that wouldn't come. His chest seized, a crushing weight that felt like the lake itself was pressing down on his lungs. Not now. Not here. The cobblestones rushed up to meet him with brutal finality. The sound of his body hitting stone echoed across the plaza like a gunshot, and suddenly the cheerful festival atmosphere shattered into chaos. Oh my God! Someone call 911. Isn't that Kieran Darius? The billionaire guy? Phones appeared like magic, a dozen cameras capturing his most vulnerable moment. But no one moved. They stood in a perfect circle around him, close enough to film, far enough to avoid responsibility. His vision blurred, darkness creeping in from the edges as his body convulsed against the cold stone. Blood, warm and metallic, pooled beneath his cheek. Through the haze of approaching unconsciousness, he could hear them talking about him like he was already gone. Someone should do something. Where are his bodyguards? I'm not touching him. What if he sues? Just keep filming. This is going viral. The irony cut deeper than the pain. Kieran Darius, the man who could buy and sell most of these people with a phone call, was dying alone in a crowd of strangers who saw him as nothing more than content for their social media feeds. That's when she appeared. Lyra had been watching from her bench when she saw him fall. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to keep her head down and avoid attention. But the moment she saw his body hit the ground, saw the way he convulsed and went still, something deeper than fear took over. She was on her feet before conscious thought could stop her, pushing through the crowd with a determination that surprised even her. The baby protested the sudden movement, but she pressed forward, her medical training overriding every survival instinct that had kept her alive these past months. Move! Her voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. Everyone back up now. A man in an expensive suit tried to block her path. Ma'am, you shouldn't, the paramedics are coming. She shoved past him with surprising strength, her green eyes blazing. I'm a doctor. Move. The lie came so easily it surprised her. She wasn't a doctor anymore. Hadn't been since the night she'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back. But muscle memory was a powerful thing, and right now, this man needed her skills more than her honesty. She dropped to her knees beside Kieran, ignoring the way the rough cobblestones bit through her jeans. Her hands, steady despite everything, found his throat, searching for a pulse that wasn't there. No pulse, no breathing, she muttered, more to herself than the crowd. The whispers started immediately. Who is she? She's pregnant. Should she be doing that? Someone stop her before she makes it worse. But Lyra had already tuned them out. The world narrowed to just her hands and his chest, to the rhythm she'd performed hundreds of times in emergency rooms across the country. She placed her palms over his heart and began compressions, counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool autumn air. The baby kicked in protest, but she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. This man, this stranger, was someone's son, maybe someone's father. He had people who loved him, people who would grieve if she failed. Come on, she whispered, pressing harder. Come on, don't you dare give up on me. The crowd pressed closer, their phones capturing every moment. She could hear their commentary, their judgment, but it felt distant and unimportant. All that mattered was the man beneath her hands and the stubborn refusal of his heart to beat. 15, 16, 17. Her arms burned. Her back ached. The baby's movements became more agitated, but still she continued. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, but they sounded impossibly far away. 28, 29, 30. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and breathed life into his lungs. Once, twice. Then back to compressions. 1, 2, 3. That's when it happened. A shudder ran through his body, followed by a gasping, choking sound that was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. His chest lurched, his back arched, and suddenly his eyes flew open, dark brown, wide with confusion and fear. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they stared at each other. His eyes, still clouded with the remnants of unconsciousness, seemed to look straight through her, as if he could see every secret she carried, every truth she'd tried to bury. You're okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing sound of sirens. You're going to be okay. He tried to speak, his lips moving soundlessly. She leaned closer, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with the metallic scent of blood, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Who? He managed, his voice rough as gravel. But the sirens were getting closer, and with them would come questions she couldn't answer, attention she couldn't afford. The crowd was already pressing in, phones still recording, voices rising in excitement. She saved him. Did you get that on video? Who is she? Panic, cold and familiar, flooded her system. She had to go. Now. Before the paramedics arrived, before the police started asking questions, before someone recognized her from the missing person reports David had undoubtedly filed. She started to pull back, but his hand shot out with surprising strength, catching her wrist. His grip was weak but desperate, his eyes pleading. Wait, he breathed. Please. For a heartbeat, she almost stayed. Something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life, made her want to throw caution to the wind and trust again. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not anymore. I'm sorry, she whispered, gently pulling free from his grasp. I have to go. She stood on unsteady legs, the crowd parting around her like water. The sirens were deafening now, red and blue lights painting the cobblestones in urgent colors. She had maybe 30 seconds before the paramedics arrived, before this plaza became a crime scene of sorts, before her face ended up on every news channel in the state. She turned and walked away, forcing herself not to run despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. Behind her, she could hear Kieran calling out, his voice stronger now but still rough. Wait. Please, I need to know. But she was already disappearing into the crowd, just another face among hundreds, invisible once again. By the time the paramedics reached Kieran Darius, by the time they'd loaded him onto a stretcher and begun their assessment, she was gone. Vanished like smoke on the wind, leaving behind only questions and the lingering scent of lavender that he would remember for the rest of his life. The private room at Ember Falls General Hospital smelled like antiseptic and expensive flowers, a combination that made Kieran's head pound worse than the concussion already did. He'd been awake for 6 hours, and in those 6 hours, he'd asked the same question 47 times. Who is she? Dr. Patricia Henley, the attending physician, looked up from his chart with the patience of someone who'd dealt with difficult patients before. Mr. Darius, as I've explained, we're focusing on your recovery right now. You suffered a severe cardiac episode. I know what I suffered. Kieran's voice carried the edge that made board members squirm. What I want to know is who saved my life. The paramedics. Not the paramedics. He struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the way the movement made his ribs ache. The woman. Pregnant, auburn hair, green eyes. She performed CPR before the paramedics arrived. Dr. Henley exchanged a glance with James, who'd been hovering by the window like a nervous bird since Kieran had regained consciousness. Sir, there were a lot of people at the scene. The stress of the event, combined with the lack of oxygen to your brain. I'm not hallucinating. The words came out sharper than he intended. She was real. She saved my life, and then she disappeared. Mr. Darius, James stepped forward, tablet in hand as always. I've reviewed all the footage from the scene. There are dozens of videos, and yes, there was a woman who administered CPR. But she left before anyone could get her information. Finally, Kieran felt something loosen in his chest. Show me. James hesitated. Sir, perhaps you should rest. Show me the footage, James. With obvious reluctance, James pulled up a video on his tablet. The quality was shaky. Someone had filmed it on their phone, but there she was. Kneeling beside him on the cobblestones, her hands moving with practiced precision, her face a mask of concentration. Kieran watched himself die and come back to life, but all he could focus on was her. The way she'd pushed through the crowd without hesitation. The way she'd ignored their whispers and judgment. The way she'd looked at him when he'd opened his eyes, like he was worth saving. Run it again. Sir. Again. They watched it 3 more times before Dr. Henley intervened. Mr. Darius, you need to rest. Your body has been through significant trauma. But Kieran wasn't listening. He was studying every frame, memorizing every detail. The oversized gray sweater. The way she'd tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gentle curve of her belly that spoke of new life growing within. I want to find her. Sir, James said carefully, perhaps it's best to let this go. She clearly didn't want to be identified, or she would have stayed. She saved my life. The words came out quiet, but they carried the weight of absolute conviction. I owe her everything. What he didn't say, what he couldn't quite articulate even to himself, was that something had passed between them in that moment when their eyes met. Something that felt like recognition, like coming home after a long journey. Something that made the constant ache in his chest, the one that had been there since Emma died, ease for the first time in 3 years. I want every private investigator in the state looking for her. I want Mr. Darius. Dr. Henley's voice cut through his planning with professional authority. You suffered a massive heart attack. At 34. Your stress levels are through the roof, your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and you're talking about launching a manhunt for a woman who clearly values her privacy. She's not a criminal. No, but you're acting like one. The words hung in the air like a challenge. This woman performed a heroic act and then chose to leave. Maybe you should respect that choice instead of trying to hunt her down. Kieran stared at the doctor, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. Hunt her down. Is that what he was doing? Was he so desperate for connection, so starved for genuine human contact, that he was willing to violate this woman's obvious desire for anonymity? But then he remembered the way she'd looked at him. The fear in her eyes hadn't been fear of him. It had been fear of something else. Someone else. And the way she'd apologized before leaving, like she'd wanted to stay but couldn't. She was running from something. Someone. And that thought made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. 24 hours, he said finally. Give me 24 hours to find her and thank her properly. If she doesn't want to see me, I'll respect that. But I need to try. Dr. Henley looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression must have convinced her. 24 hours. Then you're taking a medical leave and focusing on your recovery. Fine. But even as he agreed, Kieran knew 24 hours wouldn't be enough. This woman, this mysterious angel who'd breathed life back into his lungs, had awakened something in him that he'd thought died with Emma. And he wasn't about to let that feeling slip away without a fight. 3 miles away, in a cramped motel room that smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams, Lyra sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the news report on the ancient television. Billionaire Kieran Darius is recovering tonight after suffering a massive heart attack during the Ember Falls Heritage Festival. The dramatic rescue was captured on multiple cell phone videos, showing an unidentified woman performing CPR before paramedics arrived. Her own face filled the screen, grainy and distorted, but recognizable enough to make her blood run cold. The reporter continued, but the words faded into white noise as panic took over. They had her on camera. Her face was on the news. And if it was on the news here, it would be on the news everywhere, including wherever David was watching. She grabbed the remote with shaking hands and turned off the television, but the damage was done. The silence that followed felt oppressive, heavy with the weight of inevitability. She'd been so careful for 6 months. 6 months of staying invisible, of keeping her head down, of never staying in one place long enough to leave a trail. And now, because she'd let her conscience override her survival instincts, she was exposed. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of what was at stake. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the familiar flutter of movement beneath her palms. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered. Mama made a mistake. But even as the words left her lips, she knew she'd do it again. She couldn't have watched that man die, not when she had the skills to save him. It went against everything she was, everything she'd trained to be. The question now was what to do next. She had maybe 12 hours before David's people started looking for her in Ember Falls. 12 hours to disappear again, to find another town, another motel, another temporary refuge. She stood and began packing her few belongings, the routine familiar and heartbreaking. Everything she owned fit in a single duffel bag, a far cry from the life she'd built before David destroyed it all. As she folded the gray sweater, she caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Something that reminded her of safety and strength, and the way Kieran Darius had looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. She shook her head, banishing the thought. She couldn't afford to think about him, couldn't afford to wonder what might have been if circumstances were different. He was a billionaire, a man who lived in a world of private jets and board meetings and security details. She was a woman on the run, carrying another man's child, with nothing to offer but trouble. But as she zipped up the duffel bag and prepared to disappear into the night once again, She couldn't shake the memory of his eyes. The way they'd held hers with such intensity, such desperate need. The way he'd whispered, please, like she was his last hope. The knock on the motel room door came at 11:47 p.m., soft but insistent. Lyra froze, her hand halfway to the light switch, her packed duffel bag sitting by the door like a guilty confession. Police? David's men? Or just another guest looking for the ice machine? She held her breath, counting the seconds. The knock came again, followed by a voice that made her heart skip. I know you're in there. Please. I just want to talk. Kieran Darius. Somehow, impossibly, he'd found her. Lyra pressed her back against the door, her mind racing. How? She'd paid cash for the room, used a fake name, parked her beat-up Honda 3 blocks away. She'd been so careful. I'm not going away, his voice continued, muffled but determined. I'll stand out here all night if I have to. Through the thin walls, she could hear other guests stirring, annoyed voices complaining about the disturbance. The last thing she needed was more attention, more people looking at her, remembering her face. Against every instinct screaming at her to stay silent, she spoke. How did you find me? The sweater. His voice was closer now, like he'd moved right up to the door. You left a thread on my jacket. Cashmere blend, specific dye lot. There are only 3 stores in a 50-mile radius that sell that exact color. The clerk at Morrison's remembered you, said you bought it 6 months ago, paid cash, looked like you were in a hurry. Lyra closed her eyes. Of course. She'd been so focused on avoiding digital trails that she'd forgotten about the physical ones. The sweater had been an impulse buy during her first week on the run, when the October nights had turned cold and she'd needed something warm. From there, it was just a matter of checking every motel, hotel, and boarding house in town. You're registered under the name Sarah Mitchell, but the desk clerk recognized you from the news footage. Her fake ID. Another mistake. She'd thought she'd been so clever, but apparently she'd been leaving breadcrumbs the whole time. What do you want? She asked, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. To thank you. To talk. To understand why you ran. I don't owe you anything. No, he agreed, and something in his tone made her lean closer to the door. But I owe you everything. And I think maybe you need help. The words hit her like a physical blow. Need help. God, if only he knew how desperately she needed help. How tired she was of running, of looking over her shoulder, of wondering if today would be the day David finally caught up with her. But accepting help meant trust, and trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant danger. Not just for her, but for the baby. I can't, she whispered. Can't what? Can't accept help? Can't trust a stranger? Or can't stop running long enough to let someone care about you? The accuracy of his words made her flinch. Through the door, she could hear him shift, and she imagined him leaning against the frame, as tired as she was. I know what it's like, he continued, his voice softer now. To be afraid. To feel like the whole world is against you. To think that if you just keep moving, keep your head down, maybe the pain will stop following you. You don't know anything about me. I know you're a doctor. Or were. The way you perform CPR, the confidence in your movements. That's not something you learn from a first aid class. I know you're running from something, or someone, because no innocent person disappears that quickly after saving a life. And I know you're scared, because I can hear it in your voice. Lyra's throat tightened. He was reading her like an open book, seeing through every defense she'd carefully constructed. I also know, he continued, that you're about 6 months pregnant, you're alone, and you're staying in a motel that charges by the hour. Which tells me that whatever you're running from, it's bad enough that you'd rather risk your safety and your babies than face it. Stop. The word came out sharper than she intended. I can help. You can't. Try me. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Lyra found herself wanting to open the door, wanting to trust this man who'd somehow tracked her down not to hurt her, but to thank her. But wanting something and being able to have it were 2 very different things. If I open this door, she said finally, and you try anything, I won't. If you call the police, I won't. If you, Lyra. The sound of her real name on his lips made her freeze. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because you saved my life, and I think maybe I can save yours. Her hand moved to the deadbolt before she could stop herself. How did he know her real name? How much had he discovered in his search for her? How do you? Dr. Lyra Carter. Johns Hopkins Medical School, graduated summa cum laude. Emergency medicine residency at Massachusetts General. You worked at St. Mary's Hospital in Boston until 6 months ago, when you suddenly disappeared. No forwarding address, no explanation. Your colleagues said you just vanished. Each word hit her like a hammer blow. He'd done his homework, probably had a team of investigators digging into her past while she'd been sitting here thinking she was safe. There's more, he continued, and she could hear the careful control in his voice. Dr. David Thornfield reported you missing 3 days after you disappeared. Said you were suffering from pregnancy-related depression, that you might be a danger to yourself and your unborn child. He seemed very concerned, very invested in finding you. The mention of David's name made her stomach lurch. She pressed her forehead against the door, fighting the wave of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. But here's the thing, Kieran's voice continued, gentle but implacable. I had my people look into Dr. Thornfield too, and what they found was interesting. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. What did they find? 3 other women, all former colleagues, all reported missing at various times over the past 5 years. All found eventually, but not before they'd suffered what the reports called unexplained injuries. All of them filed restraining orders against Dr. Thornfield that were mysteriously dropped or dismissed. The world tilted sideways. Other women. There had been other women, and she'd never known. She'd thought she was the first, the only one stupid enough to fall for David's charm. One of them, Kieran continued, his voice barely above a whisper, died in a car accident 2 weeks after her restraining order was dismissed. Single car crash, no witnesses. Very tragic. Very convenient. Lyra's legs gave out, and she slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, her back pressed against the wood. The baby kicked frantically, responding to her elevated heart rate, her spiking blood pressure. So you see, Kieran said, and she could hear him settling down on the other side of the door. I think I understand why you're running. And I think you understand why I can't just walk away and pretend I never found you. He'll kill me, she whispered, the words barely audible. If he finds me, he'll kill me and take the baby. Not if I have anything to say about it. The conviction in his voice made something crack open in her chest. When was the last time someone had offered to protect her? When was the last time she'd felt like she wasn't facing the world alone? Why? She asked. Why do you care what happens to me? The silence stretched so long she thought he might have left. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said. Because when I opened my eyes and saw you, it was the first time in 3 years that I felt alive. And because no one should have to face their demons alone. What would you do if someone offered you safety, but you weren't sure you could trust them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Lyra reached for the deadbolt. The sound of it sliding back seemed to echo through the small room like a gunshot. She opened the door. Kieran Darius sat on the floor outside her room, his back against the opposite wall, still wearing the clothes from the hospital. Wrinkled dress shirt, loosened tie, expensive shoes that had seen better days. He looked exhausted, vulnerable in a way that billionaires weren't supposed to look. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. Hi, he said simply. Hi, she replied, and despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the voice in her head screaming that this was a mistake, she found herself almost smiling. They sat there for a moment, 2 broken people on opposite sides of a doorway, neither quite sure what came next. So, Kieran said finally, can we talk? Lyra looked down the empty hallway, then back at his face. At the genuine concern in his dark eyes, the careful way he held himself, like he was afraid of spooking her. I suppose, she said, we already are. The motel room felt smaller with Kieran in it, his presence filling the space in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size. He sat in the single chair by the window while Lyra perched on the edge of the bed, the distance between them carefully maintained, but somehow intimate. Tell me about Emma, Lyra said quietly, surprising them both. Kieran's head snapped up, his eyes sharp with something between pain and surprise. How do you? You said it was the first time in 3 years you'd felt alive. And when you looked at me, she paused, searching for the right words. You looked at me like you were seeing a ghost. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old grief. Emma was my daughter. She would have been 6 next month. Would have been. The past tense hit Lyra like a physical blow. She'd known somehow, from the moment she'd seen his face, but hearing it confirmed made her chest ache. What happened? Kieran stood and moved to the window, staring out at the parking lot like it held answers to questions he'd stopped asking. Leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic. She was diagnosed when she was 2, fought for 3 years. 3 years of hospitals and treatments and hope and… He stopped, his shoulders rigid with tension. I'm sorry, Lyra whispered. The worst part wasn't losing her, he continued, his voice barely audible. The worst part was that I couldn't save her. I had all the money in the world, access to the best doctors, the most experimental treatments. I could buy anything, fix anything, except the one thing that mattered. Lyra understood then, the weight he carried, the reason he'd seemed so desperate to find her. She'd saved his life when he couldn't save the one that mattered most. Is that why you had the heart attack? The stress. He turned back to her, and she was struck again by how young he looked despite the expensive clothes and the weight of responsibility he carried. Partly. I haven't been taking care of myself since she died. Haven't been sleeping, eating. Just working, trying to stay busy enough that I don't have to think about the fact that she's gone. And her mother? Something flickered across his face. Pain, regret, something deeper. Rebecca left 6 months after the diagnosis. Said she couldn't handle watching Emma die. I haven't seen her since the funeral. The casual way he said it, like it was just another fact to be catalogued, broke Lyra's heart. This man had lost everything, his daughter, his wife, his will to live. And yet he'd somehow found the strength to track her down, to offer her help when he was barely holding himself together. Your turn, he said, settling back into the chair. Tell me about David. The name made her flinch, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. If he'd shared his pain, she owed him the same honesty. I met him at the hospital. He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. He swept me off my feet, flowers, expensive dinners, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard. I thought I was living in a fairy tale. When did it change? Gradually. So slowly I didn't notice at first. He started questioning my decisions, my friendships, my work schedule. Said he was worried about me, that I was working too hard, that my friends were a bad influence. It felt like caring, like protection. Kieran's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Then came the isolation. He convinced me to move in with him, said it would be easier, more romantic. Suddenly I was an hour away from work, from my friends, from anyone who might notice the changes. He started monitoring my phone calls, my emails. Said it was because he loved me so much he couldn't bear the thought of losing me. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. The admission tasted bitter. I'd never had anyone care about me that intensely before. My parents died when I was in medical school. I didn't have siblings. David made me feel like I was the center of someone's universe. When did it turn violent? The question hung in the air like a blade. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the room's stuffiness. The first time was 6 weeks after I moved in. I'd gotten a call from the hospital. Emergency surgery. They needed me to come in. David said no, that I'd promised to cook dinner for his colleagues. When I tried to leave anyway, She touched her cheek unconsciously, remembering the sting, the shock, the way he'd immediately apologized and cried and sworn it would never happen again. But it did happen again. It always happens again. The words came out flat, matter of fact. The apologies got shorter, the excuses more elaborate. I was clumsy, I was stressed, I was asking for it. And somehow I started believing him. Kieran's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained gentle. When did you find out you were pregnant? 3 months ago. I thought he'd be happy. I thought maybe a baby would change things, make him want to be better. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Instead, it made him worse. More possessive, more controlling. He said the baby was his, that I belonged to him now, that I'd never be able to leave. But you did leave. I tried to once. 2 months ago. I packed a bag while he was at work, made it as far as the train station. But he found me, dragged me back home and… She stopped, the memory too painful to voice. What changed? What made you finally run? Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving to her belly. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I found his journal. Hidden in his office, locked in a drawer I wasn't supposed to open. It was full of plans. For after the baby was born. How he was going to make sure I never left again. How he was going to make me disappear if I tried. The silence that followed was deafening. Kieran's face had gone pale, his eyes dark with a fury that made her shrink back instinctively. I'm sorry, he said immediately, noticing her reaction. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at him. At what he did to you, what he's still doing to you. He's not going to stop looking for me, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. He has money, connections, resources. And now that my face is on the news, he'll find you. Yes. Kieran stood and began pacing, his mind clearly working through possibilities. We need to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't reach you. There is nowhere safe. Not from him. There is. He stopped pacing and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. My estate. It's 40 acres, completely private, state-of-the-art security system. He'd never be able to get close. Lyra stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You're offering me, what? Sanctuary. I'm offering you protection. A place to stay until we can figure out a permanent solution. You don't even know me. I know enough. He moved closer, careful not to crowd her, but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. I know you're brave enough to save a stranger's life. I know you're strong enough to leave an abusive situation to protect your child. I know you're smart enough to stay hidden for 6 months with limited resources. And I know you deserve better than running for the rest of your life. Why would you do this? What's in it for you? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Maybe, he said finally, because saving you feels like the first meaningful thing I've done since Emma died. Maybe because I understand what it's like to feel powerless, and I have the resources to make sure you never have to feel that way again. Or maybe because when I looked into your eyes today, I saw something I thought I'd lost forever. What? Hope. The word hung between them, fragile and precious. Lyra felt tears prick at her eyes, emotions she'd kept buried for months threatening to surface. I can't pay you back. I have nothing to offer. You already gave me everything. His voice was soft, certain. You gave me my life back. Let me return the favor. Lyra looked around the dingy motel room, at her single duffel bag, at the life she'd been living for the past 6 months. Then she looked at Kieran, at this man who'd somehow found her in the darkness and offered her light. If I say yes, she said slowly, and this goes wrong if David finds me. He won't. But if he does, then he'll have to go through me first. The quiet conviction in his voice made her believe him. And I promise you, Lyra, I won't let anyone hurt you or your baby. Not while I'm breathing. She studied his face, looking for deception, for hidden motives, for any sign that this was too good to be true. But all she saw was sincerity, and something else, a need that matched her own. He needed to save her almost as much as she needed to be saved. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll come with you. But I have conditions. Relief flooded his features. Name them. This is temporary. Just until I can figure out a permanent solution. Agreed. I pay my own way. I won't be a charity case. We'll figure something out. And if I want to leave, you let me go. No questions, no arguments. He hesitated for just a moment, and she saw something flicker across his face. Fear, maybe, or loss. But then he nodded. If that's what you want. It is. Then we have a deal. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was warm, callous despite his wealth, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system. There's one more thing, she said, not letting go of his hand. I need to know about the other women. The ones David hurt. I need to know their names. Lyra, I need to know. Her grip tightened. If we're going to stop him, if we're going to make sure he never does this again, I need to know everything. Kieran studied her face, and she could see the moment he recognized the steel beneath her fear. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about justice. All right, he said. But not tonight. Tonight, we get you somewhere safe. Tomorrow, we plan. She nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright for months was finally fading, leaving her feeling hollow and fragile. "I need to pack," she said, though there wasn't much to pack. "I'll wait outside. Give you some privacy." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Lyra? Yeah. Thank you. For trusting me." She watched him go, then sank onto the bed, her hands shaking as the reality of what she'd just agreed to hit her. She was going home with a man she'd known for less than 24 hours, a billionaire who claimed he wanted to protect her. It was either the smartest decision she'd ever made, or the most dangerous. But as she folded her few belongings back into the duffel bag, she found herself thinking about the way he'd said her name, the way he'd looked at her like she was worth saving. For the first time in months, she felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. The Darius estate sat on the shores of Lake Ember like something out of a dream, all stone and glass and impossible elegance. As Kieran's car wound up the private drive, Lyra pressed her face to the window, watching the landscape transform from public road to manicured perfection. "It's beautiful," she breathed, and meant it. "Emma loved it here," Kieran said quietly, his hands steady on the wheel. She used to say the lake looked like liquid starlight at night. The house itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the water. But as they pulled into the circular drive, Lyra noticed the details that spoke of a life interrupted. A swing set visible in the backyard, a small bicycle leaning against the garage, a garden that looked like it had once been carefully tended but now grew wild. "You kept everything," she observed. "I couldn't. I wasn't ready to let go." She understood. Grief had its own timeline, its own rules. Who was she to judge how someone processed the loss of a child? The inside of the house was just as stunning as the exterior, but it felt hollow somehow, like a museum of a life that had stopped 3 years ago. Family photos lined the mantelpiece. Kieran with a little girl who had his dark eyes and an infectious smile, the three of them together before the world fell apart. "The guest wing is this way," Kieran said, leading her down a hallway lined with windows overlooking the lake. "You'll have complete privacy, your own entrance if you want it. The kitchen is stocked, there's a library, a gym if you're interested." He was nervous, she realized. This powerful man who commanded boardrooms and built empires was nervous about whether she'd be comfortable in his home. "Kieran," she said, stopping in the middle of the hallway. "This is more than enough. More than I ever expected. I want you to feel safe here." "I do." And surprisingly, it was true. For the first time in months, the constant tension in her shoulders was beginning to ease. He showed her to a suite that was larger than most apartments, complete with a sitting area, a bedroom with a view of the lake, and a bathroom that belonged in a luxury spa. But what caught her attention was the small detail he'd added. A vase of fresh flowers on the nightstand, the same lavender scent she'd been wearing the day she saved his life. "How did you?" "I noticed," he said simply. "At the hospital. I thought it might help you feel at home." The gesture was so thoughtful, so unexpectedly tender, that she felt tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time someone had paid attention to what she liked, what made her feel comfortable? "Thank you," she whispered. "There's food in the kitchen whenever you're hungry. I'll be in my office if you need anything. It's the room at the end of the hall. And Lyra." He paused at the door. "You're safe here. I promise." After he left, Lyra stood in the middle of the beautiful room, trying to process the surreal turn her life had taken. 12 hours ago, she'd been preparing to run again. Now she was standing in a billionaire's guest suite, surrounded by luxury she'd never dreamed of. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of why she was here, why she'd taken this leap of faith. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the familiar flutter of movement. "What do you think, little one?" she murmured. "Think we can trust him?" As if in answer, the baby settled, the frantic movements of the past few days calming for the first time since she'd seen her face on the news. She unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her few clothes in a closet that could have housed a small family. Then, drawn by the smell of something delicious, she made her way to the kitchen. She found Kieran standing at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. He'd changed out of his hospital clothes into jeans and a simple sweater, and the casual attire made him look younger, more approachable. "I hope you like pasta," he said without turning around. "It's about the only thing I can make that's actually edible." "You cook?" "Emma taught me." He glanced over his shoulder, smiling at the memory. She went through a phase where she wanted to be a chef. We spent hours in here, making messes and burning things. Rebecca used to complain about the state of the kitchen, but Emma loved it. Lyra settled onto one of the bar stools, watching him work. There was something soothing about the domestic scene, the simple act of preparing food, sharing space. "Tell me about her," she said. "What was she like?" Kieran's hand stilled for a moment, then resumed stirring. "Fearless. Absolutely fearless. She'd climb anything, try anything, talk to anyone. The doctor said sick children often become withdrawn, but not Emma. If anything, the illness made her more determined to experience everything. She sounds amazing." She was. He ladled the pasta into bowls, the simple marinara sauce filling the kitchen with the scent of garlic and herbs. "She would have liked you, I think. She always gravitated toward people who helped others." They ate in comfortable silence, the food better than anything Lyra had tasted in months. Real ingredients, prepared with care, shared with someone who understood what it meant to be grateful for simple pleasures. "This is delicious," she said, and meant it. Emma's recipe. She insisted on adding extra garlic, because it made everything taste better. "Smart girl." "The smartest." He set down his fork, studying her face. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What made you want to be a doctor?" The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her dreams, her motivations, anything beyond her immediate survival. "My parents," she said finally. "They died in a car accident when I was 22. Drunk driver, head-on collision. They were rushed to the ER, but the doctors couldn't save them. I remember thinking that if I'd been there, if I'd known what to do, maybe things would have been different. So you decided to learn." "I decided to make sure I'd never feel that helpless again." She took another bite, the familiar ache of old grief mixing with the comfort of the food. "What about you? What made you want to build an empire?" "Honestly, I wanted to prove I was worth something. My father was difficult. Nothing I did was ever good enough, smart enough, successful enough. So I kept pushing, kept building, kept trying to earn approval that never came." "Did you? Earn it, I mean?" "He died before I could find out." Kieran's smile was rueful. "Heart attack, ironically enough. I was in the middle of closing the biggest deal of my career, and all I could think was that he'd never know I'd finally made it." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It took me years to realize I was building the wrong life for the wrong reasons. Emma taught me that. She didn't care about the money or the success. She just wanted me to read her stories and teach her to make pancakes and be present. Have you ever had someone completely change your perspective on what really matters? I'd love to hear about it in the comments." They finished eating as the sun set over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Lyra found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. The combination of good food, beautiful surroundings, and genuine conversation working like a balm on her frayed nerves. "I should let you rest," Kieran said, standing to clear the dishes. "You've had a long day. Let me help." She reached for her bowl, but he waved her away. "You're a guest. And pregnant. Sit." "I'm pregnant, not disabled. Humor me." She watched him move around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, loading the dishwasher, wiping down counters. There was something deeply attractive about a man who took care of domestic tasks without complaint, who found satisfaction in simple acts of service. "Kieran, why haven't you? I mean, it's been 3 years. Haven't you thought about dating again? Starting over?" He paused, his hands stilling on the dish towel. "I tried once. About a year ago. A friend set me up with someone, a lawyer, very accomplished, very beautiful. We went to dinner, made polite conversation, and all I could think about was how Emma would have hated her." "Why?" She was cold. Calculating. Everything was about status, about being seen with the right people. Emma always said you could tell a lot about a person by how they treated people who couldn't do anything for them. This woman was rude to the waiter, dismissive of the valet. Emma would have seen right through her. "So you never saw her again?" "I never saw anyone again. It felt like betraying Emma's memory, trying to replace what we had." Lyra understood. She'd felt the same way about her parents, like moving forward meant leaving them behind. "But maybe," she said carefully, "Emma wouldn't want you to be alone forever. Maybe she'd want you to find happiness again." Kieran looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. Something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But it would have to be with someone special. Someone who understood what it meant to love completely, to sacrifice everything for the people who matter." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility and unspoken longing. Lyra felt herself leaning forward, drawn by the warmth in his eyes, the gentle strength in his voice. Then the baby kicked hard and reality crashed back in. She was pregnant with another man's child, running from an abusive relationship, dependent on Kieran's charity. Whatever she thought she was feeling, whatever she imagined she saw in his eyes, it was just gratitude and loneliness playing tricks on her heart. "I should go to bed," she said, standing abruptly. "Thank you for dinner. And for everything." "Lyra, wait." But she was already walking away, fleeing before she could do something stupid like fall for a man who was only trying to help her. She'd made that mistake once before, and it had nearly destroyed her. She wouldn't make it again. 3 weeks at the Darius estate had given Lyra something she'd almost forgotten existed: peace. She'd fallen into a routine that felt dangerously close to normal. Morning walks along the lake, afternoons reading in the library, evenings cooking dinner with Kieran. The baby had grown stronger, more active, responding to the reduced stress with healthy kicks and rolls that made her smile. But peace, Lyra had learned, was a fragile thing. She was in the garden, tending to the roses that had once been Emma's pride and joy, when she heard the car in the driveway. Not Kieran's quiet hybrid, but something louder, more aggressive. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the sound of the engine. A black BMW sedan, the same one that had been parked outside her apartment building the night she'd fled. David. Somehow, impossibly, he'd found her. She dropped the pruning shears and ran toward the house, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the kitchen window, she could see him getting out of the car, adjusting his tie with the same meticulous care she remembered. He looked exactly the same, tall, handsome, impeccably dressed. The kind of man who commanded respect in boardrooms and charity galas, who no one would ever suspect of the monster he became behind closed doors. "Kieran," she called, but he was in his office on a conference call with investors in Tokyo. She could hear his voice through the closed door, calm and professional, unaware that her nightmare had just pulled into his driveway. The doorbell rang, followed by David's voice, smooth and reasonable. "Hello. I'm Dr. David Thornfield. I'm looking for my fiancée, Lyra Carter. I believe she may be staying here." Fiancée. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily, so convincingly. To anyone listening, he would sound like a concerned partner searching for his missing loved one. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her mind racing. She could run. There was a back entrance through the garden. Her car was parked behind the garage. But running meant leaving Kieran to face David's questions, and she couldn't bear the thought of dragging him deeper into her mess. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. "I know she's here," David called, his voice carrying that edge she remembered so well. "Her car is in the driveway. Lyra, sweetheart, please come out. We need to talk." The endearment made her skin crawl. How many times had he called her sweetheart right before his fist connected with her face? She heard footsteps in the hallway, Kieran, finally emerging from his office. Her heart lurched as she realized what was about to happen. David was charming, persuasive, a master manipulator who could convince anyone of anything. What if he convinced Kieran that she was the problem? What if he made Kieran believe his lies? "Can I help you?" Kieran's voice was polite, but cool as he opened the front door. "Dr. David Thornfield." She could picture David extending his hand, flashing that $1,000,000 smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for my fiancée. Lyra Carter? I have reason to believe she's staying with you. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Please, Mr. Darius. I know she's here. Her car, her credit card activity. Everything points to this location. She's been missing for months, and I'm worried sick about her and our baby." Our baby. The possessive pronoun made Lyra's stomach turn. Even now, even after everything, David was claiming ownership of her child. "I think you have the wrong house," Kieran said, but Lyra could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. David was good at planting seeds of doubt, at making people question what they knew to be true. "Mr. Darius, I understand you might feel protective of her. Lyra can be very convincing when she wants to be. But she's not well. The pregnancy has affected her judgment, made her paranoid and delusional. She thinks I'm trying to hurt her, but I'm only trying to help. That's not true. The words escaped before Lyra could stop them, and suddenly both men were looking at her as she stepped into the foyer. David's face lit up with what looked like genuine relief, but she could see the cold calculation in his eyes. Lyra, thank God. He moved toward her, arms outstretched, and she instinctively stepped back. Sweetheart, I've been so worried. When you disappeared like that, without a word. Don't. Her voice was sharper than she intended. Don't call me that. Don't pretend you were worried. You know exactly why I left. David's expression shifted, becoming concerned, sympathetic. Honey, we talked about this. The pregnancy hormones, the stress, they're making you see things that aren't there. I would never hurt you. I love you. You put me in the hospital. You fell down the stairs. You were dizzy, lightheaded. The doctor said it was completely normal for pregnant women to have balance issues. The lie was so smooth, so reasonable, that for a moment Lyra almost doubted herself. That was David's gift, making her question her own reality, her own memories. But then she remembered the journal, the detailed plans for making her disappear, and her resolve hardened. Show him, she said to Kieran. Show him what your investigators found. Kieran hesitated, glancing between them. Lyra, maybe we should discuss this privately. No. David stepped forward, his mask slipping just enough for Lyra to see the fury beneath. I think I have a right to know what lies she's been telling you about me. They're not lies, Lyra said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. Aren't they? David pulled out his phone, swiping to a photo. This is from last Christmas. Does this look like the face of an abused woman? The photo showed Lyra smiling at a holiday party, David's arm around her waist. She remembered that night, how he'd gripped her so tightly it left bruises, how he'd whispered threats in her ear while maintaining that perfect smile for the camera. Pictures lie, she said. Do they? Or are you lying to yourself? David's voice was gentle, concerned, the voice of a man trying to help his delusional partner. Mr. Darius, I'm sure Lyra has told you some very convincing stories. She's always been creative, imaginative. But the truth is, she's been struggling with depression and anxiety since the pregnancy began. She's convinced herself that I'm some kind of monster, when all I've ever done is love her. Lyra watched Kieran's face, saw the doubt creeping in. David was too good at this, too practiced at making himself the victim. The other women, she said desperately. Tell him about the other women. What other women? David's confusion looked genuine. Lyra, sweetheart, there are no other women. There's only you, only us. You're the love of my life. You're lying. Am I? Mr. Darius, did your investigators actually find evidence of these alleged other women? Or did they find what I suspect they found? A brilliant, troubled woman who's created an elaborate fantasy to justify running away from the man who loves her. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra looked at Kieran, searching his face for any sign that he still believed her, still trusted her. But she could see the uncertainty there, the questions David had planted taking root. Kieran, she whispered. Please. You know me. You know I wouldn't lie about this. Do I? The words hit her like a physical blow. Lyra, I've known you for 3 weeks. He's known you for years. And if what he's saying is true, if you're not well. I'm not crazy. The words came out louder than she intended, desperate and raw. I'm not delusional. I'm not making this up. He hurt me, Kieran. He was planning to kill me. Lyra, please. David stepped closer, his voice infinitely patient. You're getting upset, and that's not good for the baby. Why don't you come home with me? We can get you the help you need, make sure you and our child are safe. No. She backed away, her hands instinctively moving to protect her belly. I won't go with you. I won't let you hurt my baby. Our baby, David corrected gently. And I would never hurt either of you. You know that. But Lyra could see it now, the subtle shift in his posture, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He was getting angry, losing patience with the charade. Soon, the mask would slip completely, and Kieran would see what she'd been trying to tell him. Mr. Darius, David said, his voice taking on a harder edge. I appreciate you trying to help, but Lyra is my responsibility. She's carrying my child, and she needs professional care that I can provide. She's not going anywhere. Kieran stepped between them, and Lyra felt a surge of relief. He still believed her. He was still protecting her. But David just smiled, the expression cold and predatory. Actually, she is. You see, I have legal guardianship papers. Signed by a judge who agrees that Lyra is a danger to herself and her unborn child. She's coming with me whether she wants to or not. He pulled out a folded document, official-looking and stamped with court seals. Lyra's heart sank as she recognized the letterhead. David had connections everywhere, judges who owed him favors, colleagues who would sign anything he asked. This is fake, she said, but even she could hear the defeat in her voice. It's perfectly legal, David replied. And if Mr. Darius tries to interfere, he'll be charged with kidnapping and obstruction of justice. Kieran took the papers, scanning them quickly. Lyra watched his face change as he read, saw the moment he realized David had outmaneuvered them. I'm sorry, he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. I can't fight a court order. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. After everything they'd shared, everything they'd built together, he was choosing to believe a piece of paper over her word. Kieran, please, she whispered. Don't let him take me. But he was already stepping aside, his face a mask of regret and resignation. I'm sorry, Lyra. I can't help you anymore. David's hand closed around her arm, his grip gentle but unbreakable. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home. As he led her toward the door, Lyra looked back at Kieran one last time. He was standing in the foyer, watching her leave, and she could see the pain in his eyes. But pain wasn't enough. Pain wouldn't save her. I trusted you, she said, the words barely audible. I thought you were different. Lyra. But David was already pulling her outside, toward the car that would take her back to hell. As the door closed behind them, she heard Kieran call her name, but it was too late. She was alone again, and this time there would be no escape. The drive back to Boston felt like a funeral procession. David kept up a steady stream of conversation. How worried he'd been, how glad he was to have her back, how they were going to get her the help she needed. But Lyra barely heard him. All she could think about was the look on Kieran's face as he'd stepped aside, the way he'd chosen legal documents over trust. She'd been a fool to think someone like him could care about someone like her. She'd been a fool to think anyone would choose her over the easier path. David's house looked exactly the same, pristine, expensive, cold. He led her inside with the same gentle firmness he'd used at the estate, his hand never leaving her arm. I've prepared the nursery, he said, guiding her up the stairs. I think you'll love what I've done with it. The room that had once been her office was now painted in soft yellows and greens, filled with expensive furniture and toys. It should have been beautiful, but all Lyra could see was a cage, a pretty prison designed to keep her and her baby trapped. What do you think? David asked, his arms sliding around her waist. It's lovely, she lied, because agreeing was easier than fighting. I knew you'd like it. His grip tightened slightly. Now, let's talk about your little adventure. 3 weeks, Lyra. 3 weeks you were gone, and I was sick with worry. I'm sorry. Are you? Because it seems to me like you were having quite the time playing house with your billionaire boyfriend. The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made her blood run cold. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Living in his house, eating his food, sleeping in his bed? I wasn't sleeping in his bed. But you wanted to. David turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with deceptive gentleness. I could see it in the way you looked at him. The way you defended him. Did you think I wouldn't notice? David, please. Did you fuck him, Lyra? The question hit her like a slap. No. I would never. But you wanted to. You wanted to spread your legs for him, like the whore you are. His hands tightened on her face, fingers digging into her cheeks hard enough to bruise. This was the David she remembered, the one who hid behind charm and respectability until his mask slipped. You're hurting me, she whispered. Good. Maybe pain will help you remember who you belong to. He released her suddenly, and she stumbled backward. Strip. What? You heard me. Take off your clothes. I want to see if he marked you, if he touched what's mine. Lyra's hands moved instinctively to protect her belly. David, the baby. The baby is fine. You're 7 months along, plenty of time for me to remind you of your place. His voice was calm, reasonable, as if he was discussing a medical procedure. Now strip, or I'll do it for you. She knew that tone, knew what came next if she refused. With shaking hands, she began to undress, hating herself for the compliance that had been beaten into her over months of abuse. That's better. David circled her like a predator, his eyes cataloging every inch of her skin. No marks. Good. That means he didn't touch you. Didn't claim you. He's not like that, she said without thinking. The backhand came so fast she didn't see it coming. Pain exploded across her cheek, and she tasted blood. Don't defend him to me, David snarled. Don't you ever defend another man to me. Lyra pressed her hand to her cheek, feeling the familiar sting of split skin. I'm sorry. You will be. By the time I'm done with you, you'll understand exactly what happens when you try to leave me. He moved toward the dresser, pulling out items that made her stomach turn. Restraints. Tools. Things she'd hoped never to see again. David, please. Think about the baby. I am thinking about the baby. Our baby. The child that's going to bind us together forever. He turned back to her, his smile cold and predatory. Did you really think you could run from me? Did you think some rich boy could save you? No, she whispered, because it was what he wanted to hear. That's right. No one can save you, Lyra. No one wants to save you. You saw how quickly he gave you up when I showed him those papers. How easily he believed that you were crazy. The words hit their mark, reopening wounds that were still fresh. Kieran had given up on her, had chosen to believe David's lies over her truth. He doesn't care about you, David continued, moving closer. No one does. You're damaged goods, Lyra. A broken woman carrying another man's bastard. Who would want that? You do, apparently. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she saw David's face darken with rage. What did you say? Nothing. I said nothing. But it was too late. She'd pushed too far, shown too much defiance. David's hand shot out, wrapping around her throat with practiced ease. You think you're clever? You think you can mouth off to me? His grip tightened, cutting off her air supply. I own you, Lyra. Your body, your baby, your life. And if you ever forget that again, I'll make sure you never get the chance to remember. Spots danced in front of her eyes as consciousness began to fade. The baby kicked frantically, responding to her distress, and she thought about Kieran's words from that first night. You deserve better than running for the rest of your life. The memory gave her strength she didn't know she had. With her last conscious breath, she brought her knee up hard, connecting with David's groin. He released her with a howl of pain, doubling over as she gasped for air. You bitch, he snarled, but she was already moving, grabbing her clothes and running for the door. She made it to the hallway before he caught her, his hand tangling in her hair and yanking her backward. She hit the wall hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. You never learn, do you? David's voice was deadly calm now, more frightening than his rage. I tried to be patient, tried to be understanding. But you just can't help yourself. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a syringe, the liquid inside clear and ominous. What is that? She whispered. Something to help you sleep. To keep you calm while I decide what to do with you. His smile was clinical, professional. Don't worry, it won't hurt the baby. I'm a doctor after all. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her mind racing. She was naked, trapped, with nowhere to run. But as David approached with the syringe, she remembered something else Kieran had said. I know you're brave enough to save a stranger's life. If she was brave enough to save someone else, maybe she was brave enough to save herself. You're right, she said suddenly, forcing her voice to stay steady. I can't run from you. I can't fight you. You're too smart, too powerful. David paused, suspicion flickering in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying I give up. I'll stay. I'll be what you want me to be. Just please don't hurt the baby. You're lying. No. She let tears fall, let her voice break with what sounded like defeat. I'm tired, David. I'm so tired of fighting, of running. You win. She could see him wavering, wanting to believe that he'd finally broken her completely. The syringe lowered slightly. Prove it, he said. Get on your knees. Lyra's stomach turned, but she forced herself to comply. As she knelt before him, she let her hand brush against the small table by the wall, feeling for the heavy crystal vase that sat there. That's better, David said, his voice thick with satisfaction. Now tell me you're sorry. I'm sorry, she whispered, her fingers closing around the vase. Tell me you'll never leave me again. I'll never leave you again. Tell me you love me." Lyra looked up at him, this man who had terrorized her, controlled her, nearly destroyed her. And for the first time in months, she felt no fear. "I love you," she lied, and brought the vase up with all her strength. The crystal connected with David's temple with a sickening crack. He dropped like a stone, the syringe rolling across the floor as blood pooled beneath his head. For a moment, Lyra just knelt there, staring at his motionless form. Then the baby kicked, reminding her that she wasn't alone, that she had someone else to protect. She grabbed her clothes and dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she pulled on her sweater. David was breathing but unconscious, and she had no idea how long he'd stay that way. She needed to call the police, needed to get help. But first, she needed to call Kieran. Her phone was in her purse downstairs, but David's was right there on the floor beside him. She grabbed it, scrolling through his contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Kieran answered on the first ring. "Thornfield." "It's me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Lyra? Jesus, where are you?" "I've been trying to. I'm at David's house. I need help." "Are you hurt? Did he?" "I'm okay. But Kieran, I need you to know something. Those papers he showed you, the court order, it was fake. All of it was fake." The silence on the other end stretched so long she thought he might have hung up. "I know," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I figured it out about 10 minutes after you left. The judge whose signature was on those papers? He's been dead for 6 months." Relief flooded through her so completely she nearly collapsed. "You believe me. I never stopped believing you. I was scared. Scared of making the wrong choice, of making things worse for you. But the moment that car pulled away, I knew I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Kieran, I'm coming to get you. Right now. Are you safe where you are?" Lyra looked down at David's unconscious form, at the blood spreading across the expensive hardwood floor. "For now. But we need to call the police. I think I might have killed him." "Good," Kieran said with such fierce satisfaction that it startled her. "Stay on the line with me. I'm 5 minutes away." "How are you 5 minutes away?" "Because I've been driving around Boston for the past 3 hours, trying to work up the courage to come get you. I wasn't going to let you face this alone, Lyra. Not again. What would you do if you had to choose between safety and standing up for someone you cared about? Let me know in the comments." As she waited for Kieran to arrive, Lyra sat on the stairs, watching David's chest rise and fall. She should feel guilty, should feel something other than relief. But all she felt was free. For the first time in months, she was truly free. And when she heard Kieran's car in the driveway, when she saw him burst through the front door with panic and love written all over his face, she knew she was finally truly safe. "Lyra!" He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms with desperate relief. "God, I thought I'd lost you. I thought." "I'm okay," she whispered against his chest. "I'm okay. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry I let him take you. You came for me. I'll always come for you." He pulled back to look at her face, his hands gentle as they traced the bruise on her cheek. "Always." Behind them, David groaned, consciousness returning. But Lyra didn't flinch, didn't cower. She had Kieran's arms around her, and she was done being afraid. "Call the police," she said, her voice steady and strong. "It's time to end this." 6 months later, the courthouse steps were bathed in golden afternoon sunlight as Lyra emerged from the building, a free woman at last. The trial had taken 4 months, but the verdict had been swift and decisive. David Thornfield was guilty on all counts. Assault, battery, kidnapping, fraud, and a dozen other charges that would keep him locked away for the next 20 years. "How does it feel?" the reporter asked, shoving a microphone in her face. "Like I can finally breathe," Lyra answered honestly. Kieran appeared at her side, his hand finding hers with the ease of long practice. "That's enough questions for today," he told the press, his voice polite but firm. "Dr. Carter needs to rest." Dr. Carter. She was that again, had been for 3 months now. The medical board had reinstated her license after reviewing the evidence of David's manipulation and abuse. She'd started working part-time at Ember Falls General, finding joy again in the work she'd thought she'd lost forever. They walked to Kieran's car in comfortable silence, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. At 8 months pregnant, she moved more slowly now, but she'd never felt stronger. Hungry? Kieran asked as he helped her into the passenger seat. Starving. This little one has been demanding ice cream all day. Ice cream it is. He leaned over to kiss her forehead, the gesture so natural, so right, that it still took her breath away sometimes. The drive back to Ember Falls was peaceful, the late spring landscape rolling past in shades of green and gold. They'd been living together officially for 4 months now, ever since the night she'd finally admitted that what she felt for him went far beyond gratitude. "I love you," she'd whispered in the darkness of his bedroom, her hands tangling in his hair as he moved above her with infinite gentleness. "I love you too," he'd replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I've loved you since the moment you brought me back to life." Now, as they pulled into the driveway of what had become their home, Lyra marveled at how much had changed. The house felt alive again, filled with laughter and music and the promise of new beginnings. They'd converted Emma's old playroom into a nursery, painting the walls a soft lavender that reminded them both of the day they'd met. "Package for you," Kieran said, pointing to the box on the front porch. Lyra recognized the return address immediately, her old colleague from Boston, Dr. Sarah Chin. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures from her residency days, along with a note that made her eyes fill with tears. "Thought you might want these back. You look happy in the news photos. I'm so glad you found your way home." "Sarah, good news?" Kieran asked, reading over her shoulder. "The best." She leaned back against his chest, feeling his arms circle her and their baby. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now." "Different how?" "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never be safe, never be happy, never be able to trust anyone again. And now I have everything I never dared to dream of." She turned in his arms, studying his face. "A home, a career, a man who loves me exactly as I am. And soon, a baby who will never know what it's like to be afraid." Kieran's hand moved to her belly, feeling the strong kicks of their soon-to-be daughter. They'd decided not to find out the sex, but Lyra was convinced it was a girl. "A little fighter, just like her mama. She's going to be beautiful," he murmured. "Strong and brave and beautiful, just like her mother. And stubborn and protective and impossibly generous, just like her father." They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun set over Lake Ember. In the distance, Lyra could see other families enjoying the evening. Children playing on the beach, couples walking hand in hand, the simple, precious ordinariness of life lived without fear. "Kieran, do you think Emma would approve? Of us, I mean. Of the baby." He was quiet for a long moment, and she could feel him thinking, choosing his words carefully. "I think," he said finally, "that Emma would love you. I think she'd be excited about having a little sister to boss around. And I think she'd be happy that her daddy found someone who makes him smile again. I hope so. I know so." He tilted her chin up, his eyes serious. "Emma taught me that love isn't finite, Lyra. Loving you doesn't mean I love her any less. It just means my heart is big enough for both of you." The baby chose that moment to kick particularly hard, making them both laugh. "I think someone's ready for dinner," Lyra said. "Ice cream dinner?" "Ice cream dinner." They went inside together, to the kitchen where they'd shared so many meals, so many conversations, so many quiet moments of healing. As Kieran scooped ice cream into bowls, Lyra found herself thinking about the woman she'd been a year ago, broken, terrified, convinced she was unworthy of love. That woman felt like a stranger now. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked, handing her a bowl topped with chocolate sauce and whipped cream. "Just how far we've come. How different everything is. Any regrets?" She considered the question seriously. The past year had been difficult. The trial, the media attention, the slow process of learning to trust again. But it had also been the most beautiful year of her life. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one. Not even the part where you had to save a grumpy billionaire's life. Especially not that part." She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, tasting chocolate and promise and forever. "That was the best decision I ever made. Even better than the ice cream for dinner decision?" "Well," she said, pretending to consider it seriously, "that's a close second." They ate their ice cream on the back porch, watching the stars come out over the lake. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called to its mate, the the sound lonely and beautiful and full of longing. "I have something for you," Kieran said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. "It's not my birthday. It's better than a birthday." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Lyra's heart stopped. "It's the first day of the rest of our lives." He dropped to one knee right there on the porch, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lyra Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion she could see in his face. "You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You brought light back into my darkness, hope back into my heart, and love back into my world. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, a simple solitaire that caught the starlight and threw it back in brilliant flashes. But it wasn't the ring that made her cry, or even the proposal itself. It was the look on his face, the absolute certainty in his eyes, the way he was offering her not just his love but his whole life. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood to kiss her with all the passion and promise of their future together. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too." The baby kicked again, as if celebrating along with them, and they both laughed through their tears. "I think she approves," Lyra said. "She better. She's going to be the flower girl." They held each other as the night settled around them. Two people who had found their way through darkness to light, through fear to love, through brokenness to wholeness. In the morning, there would be wedding plans to make, a nursery to finish, a life to build together. But tonight, there was just this, the perfect piece of being exactly where they belonged, with exactly the right person, at exactly the right time. Lyra thought about the scared, broken woman who had knelt on those cobblestones 6 months ago, performing CPR on a stranger. She'd thought she was saving his life, but the truth was, they'd saved each other. And as Kieran's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of two souls that had finally found their home, she knew that the best part of their story was just beginning. What's the most unexpected way love has found you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unlikely places.